Hi class. So over the last few days I've talked about while loops and then shortcuts in math, and now I'm going to introduce the concept of what's called a for loop. So another name for a for loop is a counted loop, and a for loop is a short form of a while loop. So how I'm actually going to demonstrate how a for loop is related to a while loop is I'm going to write something in a while loop first and point out parts of it and convert it to a for loop. So hopefully that motivation will help. And I did make some notes here, and I'll talk about these maybe a bit later. But here you can see this is the general syntax of a for loop. So where a while loop uses the word while, a for loop uses the word for. So let's say I'm going to make a while loop at outputs the numbers from 1 to 20, for example. So if I'm going to do that, I need to initialize a variable to start at 1. So I need to keep track of where I am. So I may say here int n equals 1. And I may want to, because I'm going to stop at 20, and that might actually change, it's a good idea to define a constant. So let's say the end or something. I think I used stop before. I'm just trying to make other meaningful names. So if I was to do this in a while loop, I'm going to say keep going while n is less than or equal to the n number. And we've seen this in a previous example, and then I could simply system.out.println n. Is that enough? No, and I made the wrong symbol here. That should be an equal sign. So this loop as it is will never end. What we need to do is we need to change n so that it'll eventually, this Boolean condition will eventually be false. So since it's starting at 1 and 20 or n is greater than 1, I'm going to add 1 to n. So if I said n, and if let's say I use a shortcut that we learned about yesterday, I could just say n plus plus. And as a note, that is the same as n equals n plus 1, and the same as n plus equals 1. So they're all the same. And what you feel comfortable with is what you can use. So if I run this, you can see that it's output the numbers from 1 to 20, and I'm not surprised. And if I add some comments here, we can see we initialize, I'll call it the counter. And here we are incrementing the counter. And here we have our Boolean condition. So there are 3 parts, and if you look at how a for loop is defined, we have an initialization, a Boolean condition, and an increment or decrement. So the way I could write similar code using a for loop is I would use the keyword for, and I'll use a different variable here. I'll say, let's say int I equals 1. So that's the same as the n equals 1. So I'm initializing a variable. And then I'm going to put in my Boolean condition. Keep going as long as I is less than or equal to n. And then I'm going to increase I by 1. And then inside the loop, I would just have system.out.println I. So I run this, and maybe I'll put a blank line in between. Or some stars or something, so we can see the separation between the 2 loops. I could even add an extra line by saying /n, because remember /n is an escape character that puts in a new line. So I run this, And you can see it's done 1 to 20 and 1 to 20. So the exact same results. But this loop looks just a little bit neater than this. So the reason a for loop is called a counted loop, because you increment by a certain number of times, a certain count. And I could have started this at end and kept going as long as end was greater than or equal to 1. And then I would have to decrease. So I'm just showing another example here. So if I run this, it's going to go from 20 to 1. So that's an example of decreasing or decrement. And the idea here, what I put in the notes, the initialization in the for loop only happens once at the beginning. I should have put it at the beginning. And in the Boolean condition, it happens each time we iterate or go through the loop, and it happens at the beginning of the loop. So right away, I would check it right away. And the increment decrement, picture it, if you had multiple lines of code in your for loop, it's always the last line in the loop. So if I had, let's say I put this back to the plus plus, I think it's just intuitively to see that. And we could say, system.out print line, have a nice day. System.out print line. Happy Halloween. So even all of these, this I++ still happens after what looks visibly like the last line in the loop. It'll always happen down here. This is a short form just to keep it all together. So we run this again and it will be 1 to 20. But each time we're printing out as well, have a nice day and happy Halloween. Anyway, so I hope this is a good explanation for for loops. You want to make sure that if you have any questions, you can let me know. And this I++, we don't always either have to add by 1 or subtract by 1. I could add by 2 if I wanted. Plus equals 2, for example. And then it'll go by 2s or 3s, or we can go down by 2s or 3s. So you can see here, it's starting at 135 to 19. Because once it goes to 21, of course, that's no longer less than the end. And what another good motivator for constants is that here you can see I'm using it in 2 places. And I could just change the value here and not have to change it all over my code. And I run this again, and it very easily executes the code as expected. So I will post the video and I will post the link for this code on our course website. Have a nice day. Oh yes, one more note. Check our GDB site to complete some exercises related to for loops. Okay, that's it for now.